Hello, welcome to another episode of Heal with KP. Thank you all so much for joining me. And if you have been following along, you already know that on this podcast, we explore the intersection of faith, mental health, wellness, and just overall lifestyle. If you did not catch it, please be sure to take some time and watch the last podcast episode where we talked about the stages of healing. This is something that I think is really important for all of us to understand, and also just to begin to normalize while we're on our healing journey. This is a process that we're all on, hopefully, and that it will continue as the ebbs and flows of life continues. And so please be sure to check that out. That is entitled The Stages of Healing. It was a quick video. Just take some time to check that out. And thank you for joining me for episode 3, part 1. And this is entitled, What Are You Healing From? And so oftentimes when we are going throughout life, because we face so many challenges and stressors, there might be actually things that bother us that we don't address along the way. It's very common for us to suppress that stuff because the next day, for most of us adults, we have work, we have things to do, we have people that are holding us accountable, right? So we have to keep moving forward. And so sometimes for us, we really have to stop and ask ourselves what it is that we're healing from. So this week, I really want to focus on understanding 4 specific mental health diagnoses and what they mean for our healing journey. And again, because it got a little lengthy, split this up into 2 parts. And so today, particularly, we will be focusing on anxiety and trauma. I want to be able to discuss these common diagnoses that we all see. If you're on social media, then you've heard people talk about anxiety. You've heard people talk about their trauma. You've heard me talk about trauma and anxiety over and over. And I really just want to take some time and give attention to these 2 things and highlight the importance of understanding these mental health conditions, how to recognize it, and just open up a more comprehensive discussion for us all. Okay, so what is it that we are healing from? First, let's go ahead and talk about anxiety. So some of you might be wondering, what is anxiety? And frankly, what is the difference between anxiety and just our everyday stressors, right? Anxiety is a natural response to stress. This means that it is characterized by feelings of worry, fear, apprehension, nervousness about future events, or just being uncertain about a particular outcome. And so, as I said, it is a common emotion that everyone experiences at some point. However, when our anxiety becomes excessive, persistent, it does interfere with our daily life, and it causes our quality of life to decline. And it can develop into a clinical condition that will require more attention later on and more support. So anxiety, while it also is a natural response that our body can have, it is more intense because it is overwhelming feelings of worry, overwhelming feelings of fear about things in the future that have not occurred yet. And so typically we do suggest you have someone you're talking to, a trained professional, so that you can identify what is causing your anxiety and also begin the process of learning how to manage it. Common symptoms we're going to see is excessive worry. And so this is every day. You're worried, you're concerned about something going wrong. You're worried, you're concerned, maybe even about yourself saying something wrong. You're worried about your work environment and something going wrong, right? So as believers, what we know is that our mind, it is a powerful tool. And so because our mind is powerful, often whatever we focus on, we're giving attention to. And also whatever we're focusing on, we're also kind of worshiping that thing, And so I will say excessive worry is also worshiping your problems, worshiping the things that are going wrong in your life, because that is your primary focus. And it's hard to see past any of those things. And so when we are focusing, we have excessive worry, we are worshiping our problems, then a lot of the times what follow is physical tension. We may experience restlessness when we're trying to fall asleep. We may experience even just sleep disturbances. So we fall asleep for a couple of hours, then we're up again. We might experience panic attacks. We might experience cold sweats. Those are some of the common symptoms that go along with anxiety. You also may be wondering, how does anxiety impact our daily life? our day to day. In addition to having that excessive worry, anxiety can also impact our ability to make sound decisions. It impacts our relationships with other people, and it can also impact our spiritual life. So the role of fear of uncertainty is on 10 in anxiety, right? It is uncontrollable. It is something that we feel that we cannot get a grip on. And so oftentimes when people are coming in and they're explaining the symptoms in their life, one of the things I have to sit back and do is to listen to how much is this actually impacting your life. And so we're at the point where something is impacting our relationships, it's impacting our decision-making process, it's impacting our ability to show up at work, then this is leading more to falling into the category of being an actual diagnosis of anxiety versus those normal everyday stressors. When we are healing from anxiety, when we're working to heal from anxiety, it is so important for us to identify the fears and the negative thought patterns. Identifying our negative thought patterns is something that if you've been following along, you've heard me say this over and over and over. What is a negative thought pattern that's showing up? What are the negative thoughts, period, that are showing up? And are you even aware of when you kind of fall into that track of self-sabotaging? When it comes to those irrational fears, it's so important for us to make sure we can understand the difference between a real threat and a perceived threat. The thing with anxiety is that if we're facing a irrational fear, then oftentimes it is a perceived threat, meaning something is not actually causing us to be in danger, but because of the amount of discomfort, overwhelm, and anxiousness that we feel in our body, we make that threat real. And so again, that will be a perceived threat. And so when we're managing that anxiety, we have to understand how to track those things. Now, there are certain techniques that we can use to help manage and identify those things. Again, deep breathing is a great one. I feel that a lot of people sleep on deep breathing because we don't really understand the science behind how it works for us, and not simply that woosah, taking a deep breath, because we're all familiar with that, right? But we actually want to create a sort of a pattern for us so that we can lull our body to feeling more relaxed. So one of the main breathing techniques actually that I suggest for all of my clients when I'm in session, and this is just my personal go-to, is the 4-7-8 breathing technique. And so if you've heard of the 4-7-8 breathing technique, then you already know how it goes. But if not, let me give you an introduction to it. And so the 4-7-8 breathing technique is a series of breathing, but it gives you an actual pattern to follow. And so the first number, which is the 4, you're going to inhale for a count of 4. You're going to hold for a count of 7. And then the release is for 8. You're going to exhale for a count of 8. And when you exhale, you definitely want to make sure you're blowing and making that whooshing sound with your mouth, because it's really important. And so what I want you to do just for a second, I want you to pause and try this technique. And so again, inhale on the count of 4. Pause for a count of 7. And then exhale for a count of 8. Okay. And you might not have made it all the way to 8 if y'all could hear my breath was running out by the time I was at a count of 6. But we want to continue to push and exhale all of that air out of our lungs. And so when we are anxious and we feel that we are under attack, what happens is that we actually stop breathing. What happens when we stop breathing internally in our body is that we actually increase the panic within us. And so again, a lot of times we see people having panic attacks and we might think it's a very outward expression, breathing into a brown paper bag, the person's pacing the floor, they're, biting their nails. All those things are symptoms of anxiety. And we can also be sitting very still, very calm, and holding our breath and really freaking out internally. And so what that deep breathing technique does is it allows us to slow down, to get oxygen to our brain so that we can think clearly. And so whatever internal panic that we're experiencing at that time, it allows it to subside. So in order for that 4-7-8 breathing technique to work properly, we want to do it a couple of times. And I actually encourage people each time to try to extend sometimes the exhale part, right? So try to make sure that we are really expelling all of the air out of our lungs and just slowing ourselves down. Another way that we can work to manage that anxiety is through progressive muscle relaxation. And so if you've ever gotten a massage before, then you already know typically what happens is they are focusing on different muscle groups for us, and they are trying to work out those knots. They're trying to help us relax. And so because our anxiety can impact our body, it's also something that we can carry, right? That tension. And so that progressive muscle relaxation technique is something that we want to use to help ourselves relax, right? But if we don't have access to a masseuse, that we don't have anyone who can give us a massage, there's a way that we can mimic that same massage by tensing and releasing different parts of our body. So muscle relaxation essentially would be sort of like if you've ever been in a situation and you shrugged your shoulders for too long, right? Or maybe you sit at a desk all day, and so if you are a desk worker, then I'm pretty sure by the time 5 o'clock rolls around, you're feeling a little tension in your neck, right? So with progressive muscle relaxation, we would focus on those muscle groups that feel tight, that feel overworked, and create our own series of stretching, tensing, and relaxing those muscles. Right now, if you're not driving, if you have the ability to sit comfortably in a chair, or even if you're lying in your bed, I'll encourage you just to take your shoulders and push them up as far to your ears as they can go. And I want you to hold it. I want you to continue to hold it. I want you to count to 10. And if you can still hold it even after a count of 10, continue to hold it. When our muscles are under stress, we begin to tense up. Over time with anxiety, we are slowly experiencing that tense over and over without any release. And so our body becomes very rigid. If you are still holding your shoulders to your ears, go ahead and release them. If you released it just now or even before, I'm sure you felt some sense of relief as you allowed your shoulders to drop back down. And so progressive muscle relaxation is just like that. We're squeezing our fists, holding our hand as tightly as we can, and we're releasing it, right? Just as we did before, we're pushing our shoulders up to our ears and holding it, and then we're releasing it. So our body holds so much stress and tension throughout our day. It is important for us to also have physical methods of releasing that same stress and tension, which also leads to anxiety. And so again, that's just another way that we can manage that anxiety, another way that we can make sure that we're able to get rid of it in a positive way. Another way that we can deal with anxiety is by increasing our mindfulness. Mindfulness is a type of meditation in which we focus on being aware of what we're sensing and feeling in the moment without interruption or judgment, right? And so that could be just practicing simply being present in the moment. And so one of the things that anxiety does to us if we're having an anxiety attack or if we are concerned about something is that it takes us away from the present moment. I truly encourage everyone who faces anxiety just to focus on being mindful and enjoying the moment that you are in. And so if you're at a movie with your friends, family, with a date, your spouse, enjoy that date. Focus on what you're doing. Smell the popcorn, making sure that you are paying attention even to the comfort in the seat, who you're with, right? All of these things for us, it helps us to make sure that we are practicing being present in the moment, and we normalize the small joys, right, that we might experience during that 2-hour movie time frame window. Mindfulness is something that we have to practice in order to get good at it, right? With anything in life, we have to practice in order to get good at these things. Mindfulness is also another one that I think oftentimes people discount or they downplay it because they don't think it's going to have an impact on their overall mental health. But I say give it a try. While a part of it is being present in the moment, it is also a kind of meditation. right? As believers, we know that meditation is very helpful because we are told to meditate on scripture, right? To meditate on the truths of God, to meditate on the promises of God. And that very truth is the things that will also help to carry us forward. Next thing I want to talk about is trauma. When we talk about what are we healing from? When we ask ourselves, what are we healing from? If trauma is something that you're working to heal from, I want you to make sure that you have an understanding of what trauma is first. And I will say, while there are many different forms of trauma, right? Physical, emotional, psychological, I really want to make sure that we address trauma, the umbrella, right? So not everything underneath, but what is trauma? Trauma is anything that causes mental or emotional stress for us, right? And so we know that trauma impacts our brain, trauma impacts our body, trauma causes us to even feel trapped in our decision-making process if we've been let down, if we've been disappointed on a large scale before. How trauma impacts our daily life. And so very similar to anxiety, the effects of trauma can also be seen in our relationships. It's more so seen in how we view ourselves, how we view people, how we view the world even, and also how we're able to regulate our emotion or our lack of being able to regulate our emotions. Trauma, again, is similar to anxiety and how it impacts our day-to-day life. But a lot of the times, once someone has experienced a trauma, anything that has caused mental or emotional suffering, we are more likely to see people's definition of people, of the world, and of even companies, right, sometimes change as a result of that trauma. Some of the things that can come after we experience a trauma is hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is always having to be aware of your surroundings in a way that it is critical and causes you to be anxious. And so, again, that would be constantly looking around. If you're in a restaurant, making sure you know where all the exits are. If you see anyone that looks like they could be a threat or a target, you're already thinking of preparing yourself, right? That is hypervigilance, right? Your own edge, your own guard, and very defensive as well. Another symptom associated with trauma is flashbacks. And so I know if you've seen in movies when people have flashbacks, they make it seem very animated and it's a big thing, but we know at its root, a flashback is something that occurs when our brain is hijacked to think about another situation. And so we might smell, right, something and it makes us think of someone, right? We might, see a police car for some of us, and that causes us to have a flashback. And also, one of the consequences of trauma is just that overall emotional numbness. We have felt so much, we have experienced so much that we just feel numb. If you're listening to this and you can resonate to some of these intense feelings of anxiety, some of these intense feelings of trauma, I definitely suggest that you reach out and find a local therapist in your area. And again, therapy is not the only way to heal, but it is an effective and structured way to heal. So when we're working to process and understand how to move through our trauma, there are several things that we can use to kind of move forward with this. And again, specifically with trauma and anxiety, there are different measures that have to be in place consistently, and oftentimes things will get worse before we see them getting better. Some of the principles that we can use to heal from trauma is exposure therapy. Exposure therapy is basically slowly introducing something that could be irritating to us over time so that we can build up our tolerance to it. Oftentimes, if we have experienced trauma, what that also means is that we have a very low tolerance for certain things. And no, we're not talking about reintroducing someone who, was physically abusive to you. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about reintroducing anything that was physically or emotionally harmful to you. But we're talking about exposing you to maybe an environment in which you associate that trauma with so that you can be free from those flashbacks. For example, if you experienced a traumatic event in a McDonald's, say you were attacked or say something happened, just an example, right? Exposure therapy to help you recover from being attacked at some point could include going back to a McDonald's, maybe not the particular McDonald's that you were intact in, but going back to a McDonald's, or driving to a McDonald's, right? And before you even go in. And so with things like exposure therapy, the goal is to make sure that you're able to regain your sense of what's going on in the present moment, and that past experience is not taking over your decision-making process and causing you to run, flee, and to not move forward. With exposure therapy overall, what we're wanting to do is to make sure that the person that experienced that trauma is able to go on, live their life, go to different restaurants, go to whatever places that they want to live, and not allow that past experience to hinder their ability to live a quality life. Another way that we can work to manage trauma and heal from trauma is to make sure that we are able to process and address those traumatic memories. Oftentimes when we experience a trauma, we store that information in the same part of our brain where pain is stored. And so because of that, again, trauma becomes something that lives in our body. We may be tense, we may be on edge for no reason at all, but if we're thinking about that traumatic memory, again, it's still in a sense weighing us down. It's still holding us down. It's still a burden that we're carrying. And ultimately, it is still something that has us chained, and it is impacting our ability to make sound decisions. One technique that we can use to help manage any flashbacks or disassociation from that trauma is grounding. And so grounding techniques are also focused on sort of mindfulness and being present in the moment. And it's also making sure that we're using simple comforts to make sure that we're able to calm down and reorient ourselves to what's going on in our current day. And grounding techniques can be very simple. It could be a part of what I mentioned earlier as far as taking those deep breaths and calming yourself down with the 4-7-8 techniques. Grounding techniques could also be simply walking outside in your yard and, going barefoot, focusing on feeling the grass beneath your feet, focusing on hearing certain sounds, birds in the air, and just making sure that you are allowing yourself to say, okay, this is a safe space for me. Grounding techniques in a very simple form, it uses our senses in a positive way. Oftentimes, if we are experiencing a flashback or if we're thinking about a negative traumatic memory that occurred to us in the past, those things can also hijack our senses. Our brain is a very powerful machine. And so oftentimes for us, when we experience something negative, we also remember where we were at that time, who was with us at the time, sometimes even down to the clothes that each person was wearing, and maybe even the scent of the cologne. Might not remember the name of that cologne, but if we smell it again, it could trigger us to think about it. When we're working to ground ourselves, we also want to use some of those same senses so that we're able to calm down. And so another grounding technique that we can use is the 5-4-3-2-1 grounding technique. And that would just be focused on your senses. 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can smell, 2 things you can taste, 1 thing you can feel. That's just example. You can play around with the different 5 senses, right? And with the numbers. But the key thing is making sure that we're allowing ourselves to focus on something long enough for that panic, that anxiety to go away in our body. This is a healthy distraction. I want you to view a grounding technique as a healthy distraction for you to give yourself enough time to calm down so that you can then proceed and do whatever it is that you need to do for the day. Whenever we are recovering from trauma, whenever we're healing from trauma, it is so important for us to make sure that we are building a safe environment and creating trusting relationships. So if you or anyone you know have experienced trauma, the first things that are going to be a threat to us, to that person, is going to be building trusting relationships or learning to trust people in relationships again. And also understanding the difference between a safe environment and allowing their minds, their bodies to get to a relaxed state to actually enjoy that safe environment. And it's so important for us to make sure that we're able to heal from anxiety and also that we're able to heal from trauma, because if we do not, what that means is that we are not able to enjoy the peacefulness, right? We are not even able to enjoy the fruits of our labor, so to speak, right? The things that we have worked hard for. If we still have anxiety and trauma embedded within us, then those very things will act as a barrier to the very people who are trying to love us, the good things, the good opportunities that are coming to us. And we will actually reject those things, right, out of fear of something going wrong. And I really want to make sure we're able just to understand fully how trauma and anxiety impacts us and overall our quality of life. So coming from a biblical perspective, we want to remember Psalms 34:18, which states that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. So the good thing for us, if you have experienced trauma, if you have experienced anxiety, the Word of God reminds us is that the Lord is close to us, the brokenhearted. He is able to save those who are crushed in spirit. And so it's so important for us to make sure that we are able to run to God's presence in time of deep pain and time of brokenness, because oftentimes we're questioning what truth is. We're questioning what is real, what is not. We're questioning if this is someone or something that I can trust. And I think the best thing for us to have an understanding on is ourselves and also God. So that is the one thing that is consistent. That is the one person that is consistent, the one thing that should be constant in our lives when we're trying to heal from everything, right? God is our baseline. And so we really have to make sure that we're able to go back to him and to measure everything up against his truth. I want you all to understand about anxiety is trauma is if you are experiencing severe worry, if you are experiencing flashbacks, if you are experiencing deep despair, you're concerned about what your future looks like. You do not have a hopeful picture of what you think your future looks like, and you don't have that support system, I really encourage you to seek help, whether that is through therapy, professional support, community, or professional spiritual guidance, a pastor, a minister, Christian mental health coach. Those are the things that we want to make sure that we have guidance on. Trauma and anxiety distort the very way that we see things, and it impacts our ability to make sound decisions. It is so important for us to make sure that we have support during these times so that we can overcome the negative thoughts that we have attached to ourselves. I hope that you have learned a little bit more about anxiety and trauma and what it could look like for us if we're healing from those things and what we could do to get started to manage those things in our lives. Thank you all so much for listening. Again, this is Kateria Poe, and thanks for listening to my podcast, Heal with KP. Be sure to hop on next week when we talk about part 2 of what are we healing from. And in that episode, I will discuss grief and depression, the correlation between the two, and also give some useful tips on what we can do to heal from those things. Thank you all so much for listening. If you have any questions and or concerns, please feel free to email, DM me on social media, repost, and share the things that really stick out to you. Therapy is something I know that everyone will not have access to, but I do believe this information is not something that needs to be withheld from anyone. So if you are on a journey to heal, if you know someone who is on a journey to heal, please share this with them. And I hope that you hear something that is useful along your healing journey. Until next time, keep healing.